We are extremely grateful to have with us today Dr. John Chelladurai, who is a social analyst specialized in conflict transformation and peace building. He did his post graduation on peacemaking at MK University, Madurai, and doctoral research on social conflict at Peace Research Center, Gujarat Vidyapeeth, a university founded by Mahatma Gandhi. During his term as director at Peace India Center, Nagpur, he initiated a number of dialogue trainings across the country. Dialogue of Life is a special approach he promotes for peace building between potentially antagonistic communities. His conflict analysis has led him to dissect economic conflicts such as unemployment and poverty and bring out pragmatic modules of optimum economic solutions. He has conducted over 59 workshops on dealing with conflict and 22 training programs on peace building across the country. He is interested in a non-violent alternative to contemporary life and is currently serving as the Dean of Gandhi Research Foundation, Jalgaon, Maharashtra. Thank you for being with us today. We're extremely grateful to have you.
Greetings. Thank you for inviting me to interact with you. OECM is doing a great job of introducing conflict training with all kind of methodologies to convert conflict into creative experience. I am pleased to be part of this exercise.
Thank you. So to start, I would like to know more about your journey, professional journey. So all throughout it, even your professional life, professional and personal life, you've had a strong link with Gandhian philosophies. So what really attracted you to his ideologies?
Gandhi gave a twin methodology, twin principles, fundamental principles, which later on evolved into methodologies. That is the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of non-violence. The truth has become a fundamental principle, and non-violence evolved into the most desirable methodology to understand the truth. His pursuit of truth lead us into a kind of comprehensive understanding of life at large. That for any social analyst is a comfortable way of understanding society and work for its good. So Gandhi's the principle of truth is a great attraction. The way he pursued it, the way he presented it, the truth not for him truth is not an abstract principle. It is a concrete experiential phenomenon, and for commoners to understand, he put truth as that which exists. This meaning is drawn from the Vedas. That which exists is Sat, and life exists. So he said life is the closest manifestation of the truth or God. If you want to see God face to face, then you have to serve life. That pursuit of truth led into a kind of Advaitic realization of life, Advaitic, non-dualistic life. My life and your life are not two different entities. They are integrally connected to one another. They are co-determinant of the common experience of life. That principle was very attractive. Then the second is the methodology, non-violence. We are basically non-violent people. Because we love life. We love the community that ensures life. The family that is born together is born with he said, the silken cord of love. That silken cord of love is nothing but a non-violent emotion. Non-violent means non-violating emotion. If you are in a family, you have to abide by certain norms, do's and don'ts, uh, and follow certain culture. This is how you have to speak, this is how you have to dress, this is how you have to eat, and our taste, our mannerism, everything is in culture. And we have to abide by that so that we can comfortably communicate with one another, transact our requirements, and ensure life for one another in the family. We don't violate. I mean, by mistake we may do, but then we have other mechanisms to course correction. But by and large, we non-violate. That is what the principle of non-violence is. If you adhere to the principle of non-violation, life is possible. If you violate, it hurts others. That is called violence. Violence means you hurt others by your misdeed, misconduct. So the methodology of nonviolence as Gandhi put forward is a very humane, practical methodology, but he evolved it into a great methodology to handle global conflicts, and that's an amazing realization, a demonstration. That was another attraction. Truth and nonviolence.
You had an extremely impressive involvement in the field of conflict transformation and resolution, peace building, and nonviolence. And for Mahatma Gandhi, he has explained that it was his wife that became his teacher in nonviolence. And similarly, I wanted to ask you, is there a specific event that in your life that happened, or is there a specific person that influenced you to motivate or dedicate your life to these areas?
I too would like to say my wife was an inspiration to me, which she is. But for the methodology of conflict transformation, I had quite a few people inspiring me, quite a few people. Of course, it is a lifelong process of learning. You have quite a lot of people coming across and give a bit of perspective into it. But I would like to recall some people who really gave significant input into this perspective that inspired me to look into. One of them is Ravindra Verma. He was my teacher. After my post-graduation, I went to Sevagram for a year of a residential program on non-violence. He was my teacher, and he set certain benchmark for us to understand life and its relationship. I mean, very, very gentle man. He taught us the art of non-violence through his life, the way he spoke, the way he conducted. He was a giant of a person. He was former cabinet minister in Morarji Desai's tenure. And he decided that he would groom young generation for non-violent leadership, and he started an institute called Institute of Gandhian Studies. It was a Bajaj aided institute. He was the director as well as the teacher for us. Very humble man. And much of the conflict perspective he introduced to me and many of us. He introduced, and the methodology of conflict, transforming conflict into a creative experience, was nothing but insistence on truth. The truth is that in a conflict, if you see, there is a relationship behind every conflict. A conflict can take place only between two people who are connected to one another, related to one another. Two strangers can have no conflict. A person in Africa and another person in Australia have no conflict, or in two corners of India have no conflict. Those who are connected only can have conflict. That means conflict means a kind of estrangement in the relationship, a error, a defect in the relationship that has to be restored. This is the fundamental understanding of conflict. Any conflict you take, it is an error in the relationship. Maybe understanding, maybe perspective, maybe taste, some aspect of our conduct, our behavior, our attitude is erroneous that causes a problem in the relationship. Then what is conflict resolution? Restoring the relationship. That is, now you have to insist on relationship and restoring relationship. Then you will understand how to conduct conflict. It will naturally turn out to be a transformative experience if you insist upon these fundamentals. And there are many other fundamentals which are essentially fundamentals of Satyagraha. He introduced to us. Some of the fundamentals are very, very simple fundamentals. Everyone would understand. That are, number one, human being is essentially good. Essentially good. It was Gandhi who said it. Essentially good. The proof is that we continue to survive. If we are essentially bad, we would have come to an extinction. Humanity would have come to an extinction. That we are continuing to survive proves that we are essentially good. Individual is essentially good, and individual is amenable to change. This is another fundamental. Every individual is amenable to change because every individual wants to live. And life can be earned only in the company of people. Everybody understands. Even the least socially oriented individual too is a social being, because the person loves one's family or one's friend circle, maybe a small circle, but loves. And the person would like to alter one's perspective, attitude towards that close circle so that life is comfortable. So the person is amenable to change. What we need to do is give sufficient information for the person, perspectives, attitudinal perspectives, so that the person will restore the relationship in a manner that is creative. This is the fundamental of Satyagraha. And he introduced that. And I would like to tell one story, how he could transform conflict very subtly. There was an incident. It was a 1-year program. On the last day, we were getting ready to vacate the campus. We were in a lighter mood, and there was a tree. That was a bell tree. Bell fruit is a delicacy for many people. And some friends said, why not we plug some fruits we can carry home? Then out of enthusiasm, I climbed the tree. I was on top of the tree. And I plucked a few fruits and I dropped it, and one of my friends was catching it from below. And it's a huge fruit, you know, it's a tough nut. It has a strong shell. Once he lost balance, it slipped out of his hand and landed straight on his nose, and his nose was completely broken. He was bleeding. He fell unconscious. I was unnerved, agitated. In fact, out of fear, I froze. I was standing on top of the tree. It was quite visible because there is little foliage. There was little leaf. And to my misfortune, my teacher just walked into that place. I was quite visible from a distance. He could see me very well, and he just walked closer to the tree. He gave instruction to the boys and asked the other friends to take him to the hospital, and he quietly walked out. He walked back to his room. He never once looked up to see me. He did not even give an indication of him having recognized or noticed me. He could have very well called me to climb down, admonished me. He could have rusticated me. He could have done anything. but he didn't do anything. And that was the most powerful message. He was silent, but the message was loud enough. It was a very healing experience. It was a very enabling experience that I had. And I can tell hundreds of such instances in that 1 year that we had with him, how subtly he would handle it. And that was a great inspiration. I can go on telling, but this is not the time to storytelling.
Thank you for that beautiful story. It was really nice to hear it. And you very beautifully laid down what a conflict is, a little touched upon what conflict transformation is. And you've mentioned that Mahatma Gandhi, you've linked it to Mahatma Gandhi and truth. So my next question for you is, since one of your specializations is conflict transformation, would you like to tell us about how we can take a conflict that ordinarily has negative connotations attached to it, and how can we transform that into something positive, like creative energy?
That's right. Thank you for that wonderful question. As I said, conflict happens between related people. Then our focus should be not conflict, but relationship. Unfortunately, we focus on conflict. And because we focus on conflict, it gives more pain. It is common sense. When you are ailing, if you concentrate on your headache, the headache appears to be very severe, unbearable. Whereas if you turn your focus on your life and all the possibilities of life that is spread around, then probably the pain will not even cause any distraction. It will not come to your attention at all. I'm not telling that we should ignore, but we are having wrong focus, wrong orientation towards conflict. That is one. Then second is, the fundamental again is, life is yearned in mutuality. We stay together so that mutually or together we ensure life for one another. So it is an indispensable relationship. Relationship is unconditional. We cannot dispense with it. That we need to we need to recognize. We have to keep it in our mind. That should be our very basic orientation. The other person is my stakeholder, my partner, my integral part of my life. I cannot dispense with. And that other person is also essentially good. Essentially good means the person is also fallible. The person is also having certain limitations, weaknesses, but essentially good. That we need to keep in mind. And the other aspect of the fundamental is the essential good individual is also an image of God, a manifestation of the truth, because the person is a reality. You are a reality. If we get into Advaitic exploration of the self, we understand we are the miniature of the universe. The cosmic energy condensed to manifest in the form of you. Then you are not just an individual, you are the image of the universe, image of God, we call. We all are children of God. That statement has great depth, that we need to recognize. The primacy of individual has to be recognized. These are all very essential, fundamental social orientations. It is not that only conflict transformers, conflict resolution facilitators should understand these things. Every individual should understand, because we are in a community, we are in a society, we are in a nation, we are in a global village. Our life is interdependent, and it is co-determined by the collective of humanity. So every individual should understand these fundamentals. The individual is primary, the individual is essentially good, image of God, a manifestation of the truth. if we understand all these things, then our approach to conflict will by itself change. I mean, error in relationship is quite common because nobody is perfect. We are all very contextual people, very subjective to many factors. So even matured people are likely to make mistakes. To err is human. That is a fundamental position. So in relationship, in life and its transactional relationship, error, mistakes, commissions, omissions are bound to happen. They are neither negative nor positive. That we need to understand. They are neither negative nor positive. They are just occurrence. You go on the street, a stone may stumble you and you may fall, you may have fallen down. You may term it a negative experience. It is not a negative experience. It is an experience. It gave you pain. It gave you pain. It is not a negative experience. The way we perceive it becomes negative. We say, oh, I have bruised myself, there is bleeding, my journey is now disrupted for 1 hour, I have to spend another 500 rupees on that. These are all our own constructions. And we term it, this aspect of the experience are negative. We don't require to term it that way. I mean, if somebody spoil your dress, you may take it as a negative experience. What if the baby in your home spoil your dress? You will not term it as a negative experience. It's an experience. It is an experience. Life is full of such experiences. How are we going to perceive it? If a stranger spit on you, you will fight. But if the baby at home spits on you, you probably smiles. You smile, right? You smile and you take it so positively. The difference is you see the stranger as a dispensable entity and the baby as an integral part of your life. The primacy of the baby is recognized fully. So when God spits, we take it as a blessing. When the children spit on, I mean, there are elders who say, you spit on me, I will be blessed, I mean, the grandparents would like the babies of the family do all nonsense on them. And they say that that is a blessing. Because they see in the baby their own self, extended self, that kind of association. These are all perspectives. So we have a kind of concentric approach to conflict. The concentric approach is a concentric circle, you understand? At the center of the circle, the individual is there. If you have only one circle, you will see everything out of that circle. You can always extend the circle. There is a next level, that is the family. Next level, that is a institution, society, nation, world, life, universe. The more you expand the circle, greater the possibility you see the problem as your own problem. The family problem is my problem. I will not, I mean, display it outside. I will not take my family problem out of the four walls because it is my problem. Do you understand? So you expand the sphere of your self consciousness, self-realization. The more you see the other person as your own extended part, and to that extent, the problem becomes just an experience, and you will transform it into a creative experience, because you cannot eliminate the other person because the other person is your extended self. That is how it becomes. So that is a satyagraha realization. I think I make sense.
Completely.
Okay. This is, I mean, it may appear this may appear to be very philosophical or value loaded. It is not that way. Even a corporate industry, corporate business house have to evolve their own self-realization. Now we talk about stakeholder consciousness. Everyone is a owner of the industry. Even the last person in the industry is a stakeholder. Stakeholder means I have a stake. I am an integral part of this. That realization everybody talk about in the business houses these days. And unless we build a unified team with a kind of commonly shared consciousness, a team, whether it is a sports team or an educational team or a business team, will not succeed. So this is essential preliminary perspective for all.
Thank you for that. You've laid out conflict transformation extremely beautifully. And as you mentioned, that it can seem a little value loaded and philosophical. So I would like to apply it to a practical situation. So for my next question, I'd like to ask you, like throughout 2020 and 2021, all across the world, we have seen numerous protests take place because of various reasons. Now, even if the protests began non-violently, even if they weren't aggressive before, they quickly took a turn and became non-violent and aggressive. So how do you
Violent.
think?
Turned violent.
Yes, violent. Sorry, non-violent. So how do you think that major stakeholders involved in the disputes could have handled those situations better?
In Satyagraha, which is a non-violent way of conducting major conflicts, the essential precondition is that the party should adhere to non-violence, one. And it is also important, the party cannot expect equal non-violent response from the other party. We cannot expect. So our non-violence adherence is unconditional. If you say, if only you are non-violent, I will also be non-violent in our conflict, that will not work. The other person is a sworn violent person. We cannot expect. It is our duty to adhere to non-violence. That is one. Second, part of the non-violence satyagraha, non-violent conflict transformation is educating the opponent who believes in violent methodology in the efficacy of non-violent methodology. It happens at home. When children learn to speak, we keep correcting the children. You cannot say that way, you have to say this way. Not just language, but the behavior, value, the conduct, the intonation, everything we correct so that the language become a medium of strengthening relationship. Otherwise, language become an offensive tool. You understand? So it is the responsibility of a non-violent transformer, conflict transformer, to unconditionally adhere to non-violence and educate the other person the efficacy, what is efficacy? The power of non-violence, the non-violence method as a superior way of conducting conflict. We have to educate. There will be resistance, but we have to believe in that. In a national situation, unfortunately, people take non-violence strategically, not because they are convinced non-violence as a superior principle. So many a time we see the struggle as a strategic non-violent struggle, not a principle-driven non-violent struggle. So they don't take weapon, they don't use impolite languages, but because it is a strategy and there is a resistance from the other side, after a period of time, they lose interest because a strategist always keep their objective before their as their target. Target their goal is their primary aim. They want to achieve it. And strategically, they found a non-violent method as a suitable one. When it doesn't yield, they get frustrated. And they think that we have to mount pressure on the other party, and they become aggressive because their focus is on the goal. Whereas in a non-violent struggle, not the goal, but the means is important. The process is important. Gandhi would say, the process is the goal in the making. You want to have a palatial house. It will not come on one day. You build it brick by brick. When you are in the process of building, no one would say it is a mansion, it is a palace. They would say, oh, some construction going on. It is not a palace at all. But the palace is in the making. So you take right means, right methodology, and you orient yourself to right fundamentals, and start conducting the process. The process itself is a great experience, and the end will come invariably. Gandhi said, you take care of the means, you take care of the process, the end will take care of itself. If you want to go to Mumbai, all you have to do is to understand, recognize the direction and start walking, cycling, or riding, driving, whatever. You forget about Mumbai, Mumbai will come because you take care of the process. You are keep walking. You understand? Mm-hmm. So in a non-violent transformation, unconditional adherence to non-violence is a very essential principle. The process itself is a reward that we need to understand. And if we take care of the process, the end will take care, in which we also need to patiently educate the other party. In a national situation, the fundamentals are already well laid. We are republic. You and I are siblings, equals. We don't have more or less right. Nobody has more power, or nobody has less power. We are all equally powered. That is the fundamental, in which I, as a fellow of your country, or a fellow citizen of this country, has the right to articulate, right to tell you what is good for our collective living, and also I have the responsibility to listen to you. If we do not listen to one another, and with the spirit of common good, do not educate one another, then the relationship will become chaotic. That is what is happening. We somewhere fail to keep the constitutional principle in mind. The spirit of constitutional principle is not governing our conduct on either side. That is a very unfortunate happening. We need to remind ourselves of this. Yeah.
You've touched upon the importance of educating other people and one another about the power of nonviolence, right? So, how does academia contribute to the field of conflict management and resolution? And do you think that it has the potential to shift India's prevalent mindset of winner takes all into something more amicable?
Academia has the primary role because knowledge is the basis of our social living. Know-how. How are we going to negotiate with the society to earn my life? I should know. If I do not know my house, if I do not know my home, I cannot have even the most elementary comfort of life. I cannot. So academia is the institution that has taken the responsibility of informing individuals, educating individuals, enlightening individual to be a complete citizen or a kind of accomplished citizen, for which we give them the basic informations, concepts we introduce through academia. That is not sufficient. We have compartmentalized it to I mean, now academics have become very, very perfunctory. It has become very literal in their sense. The spirit has been forgotten somewhere. The academia, in addition to whatever they teach, the reading, writing, arithmetics and alphabets, all those stuff, basic concepts of science and technology, they should also educate us into the larger principle of national living. An engineer is not just an engineer, he is a community builder who has taken certain responsibility which are termed as engineering responsibility. The person is essentially community builder. A district administrator, a district collector is a community builder who has taken the responsibility to administer a group of people. The group of people are his brothers and sisters. That is the constitutional principle. We are, with the spirit of fraternity, we deliver justice, equality, and freedom in the sphere of socio-economic political life, because we are stakeholders. We are a republic. So that nationalistic perspective should be instilled in the minds of every child who goes through the schooling. That is not happening. So a great deal of work has to be done by academia in building the nation. If the team member is not properly trained, however talented the member may be, the team is going to fail. National living is a team game. So to say, life is a team game. Any life, whether it is in the family or in the community or the institution, your college, university, it is a team game. We need to orient ourselves thoroughly with the system and its function, its principles, its do's and don'ts, its law and order, its jurisprudence. We need to understand. If you don't understand your department, how are you going to get knowledge from your department? You do not know the laboratory, you do not know the librarian, you do not know the teacher, then how are you going to learn? And if you do not know the system, how to prepare your project, where to submit, when to submit, if you do not know, how are you going to earn your degree? Now, to earn your degree, you have to study a lot. You have to mature yourself intellectually. But these are all the system or structural understanding that will enable you to acquire knowledge and enlighten yourself. Preconditions. So the preconditions need to be oriented. Then your knowledge will help. Now the preconditions are not oriented. A person, individual, does not know the road belongs to him or her. It is my road. It is not our road. It is my road. You understand? Because I am the owner of this nation, a stakeholder of this nation, a custodian of this nation. It is my property. So that ownership is not introduced. It is not brought to the consciousness of any individual. So a minister behaves like a feudal lord. A commoner behaves like a slave. Neither is as brutal as the other. Both are equally brutal. You understand? So academia has a greater role in building individuals into an accomplished team member. That essential systemic structural principle orientation need to be given. If we give that, then all the other knowledge, information, skill that they impart will make great sense. Academy has a great role.
Absolutely right. It's really important. I think academia now that you've said, I think it's really important. So now, in addition to conflict resolution, you've also worked in the areas of ecology and economics, and you've published books and papers on these subjects, including topics such as water crisis and self-sustaining economic zones. And one of the most prevailing issues in our society right now is, I think, climate change. Right. So, how do you think that conflict management can be used to balance these conflicting interests of corporations who only value profit, as opposed to individuals who value their fundamental right to a healthy environment, so as to come up with an amicable solution that's beneficial for everybody?
See, I mean, we cannot give cosmetic solutions. The problem is one of a very fundamental issue. It springs from the most basic tenet of life. So if we try to bring that kind of carbon credit, carbon debit kind of, I mean, restrictions, it may ameliorate, it may reduce the gravity of the problem. It will not solve the problem. Quickly people learn a shortcut to evade the norms that we evolved to curb the issue. We have over a period of time really transgressed the fundamental principles of nature. Let me give you few hints. One is we are a biological being, basically a biological being. We are social animal. Animal is first. We are animated being. That animal requires energy. And we have understood that 2,300 kilocalories will sustain an individual for a day. 2,300 kilocalorie. Might be a bodybuilder requires 4,000 kilocalorie. A pregnant lady may require 4,000 kilocalorie. Or I mean, a heavyweight champion may require 7,000 kilocalorie. But I mean, a human being cannot consume more than 10,000 kilocalorie in a day. Not at all possible. If we try to consume more than 10,000 kilocalorie, it will kill us. Right? Now, we have evolved a scientific way making life more comfortable, and all that requires a lot of energy. I cannot extend it. We have no time. Today, the kind of lifestyle we have adopted made us consumer of enormous energy. The per capita energy consumption today of an individual human being is 120,000 kilocalories, which is 3 times the energy requirement of an elephant. Each one of us have become a monster. हिंदी में बोलना है तो राक्षस, because we consume 3 times an elephant every day. Of course, we don't consume everything through mouth. The way we consume electricity, thermal power, all kind of power, paper, everything is energy converted tools and techniques or equipments that make our life what it is today. I mean, the nature says, I mean, the equation, food web equation is an elephant requires 10 square kilometer forest to survive. Each elephant. Whereas in India, the population density is 385 or so. That means in each square kilometer, we have put 1,000 elephants in terms of energy requirement. It will not sustain, the earth will not sustain. We talk about food overshoot, energy overshoot day, or energy debt day. Every year, when earth generates certain energy, it replenishes the earth so that life can survive. And we exhaust that offer of earth in 220 days. For the remaining 145 days, we borrow from the next year's reserve. It is a fundamental violation. If you say, I will not reduce my consumption from any less than 120,000 kilocalorie, but I will try to evolve a mechanism to protect ecology. You cannot have both. So Gandhi's prescription is that we have to go for, I mean, he used very, very strong words, voluntary poverty and all. Reduce, recycle, reuse, reject, remove from your life certain commodities. You can say every year 10% of my requirements I will reduce. Nothing will be diminished. Your life will be the same. If you use 10 ballpoint pen, you can tell next year onwards I will use only one and I will refill it. I will not use and throw any pen. So one pen means you saved 9 pen becoming a garbage. You understand? So we have to be a little conscious, intelligent, to evolve mechanisms of ways of reducing, recycling, or removing certain things from our lifestyle. That is what essential response to climate change. It has to happen at the individual level, and at the social or governmental level, we have to do a lot of things. Gandhi's another prescription was, see, physical labor-based production have to be promoted, because if we produce certain things through physical labor, it comes within that 2,300 kilocalorie. You don't spend more energy. Whereas mechanized means it consumes a lot of energy. So small, medium, micro industries are a good response to climatic change. Not large scale industries which consume a lot of energy. Many people have this erroneous argument. When we produce in bulk, the cost of the commodity goes down. Cost of commodity goes down, or it appears to bring the cost down, because nature, ecology takes the remaining cost. So much of energy is spent, long travel, transportation, multiple processing, packing, so many things. A commodity of 500 rupees gets a package of 100 rupees, glossy package, which has no use at all. But a corporate industry cannot deliver their commodity without such glossy packages. So large industry have a lot of associated dispensable expenditures which essentially fall on ecology. So micro, small industries are a good response. Third, it has to be an attitude. See, we have become very individualistic in our attitude. In a town, each one has a car. Each one, even for a short distance, we go by bike. We must learn to walk. That is healthy as well. If I can go by walk, I should go by walk. If I can go by cycle, I should go by cycle. If I can go by only bike, I should go by bike. If only we can go by car, we should go by car. But when we have to go by car, ensure that you go full, not just for one person a car. If you cannot avoid going by car, then you pick up people walking on the street, so that they will not use another rickshaw, added petrol burning. So this is an attitude we need to cultivate. This will also build the cohesiveness of the community. The human bonding will also be strengthened side by side. It's a collateral gain. You are saving, you are behaving climatic resilient way. In addition, you are building relationship also. When you give lift to a stranger, the person will be eternally happy. Oxytocin in you will be stimulated and you become a pleasant person, and that person carrying that pleasantness will become a pleasant person to another person. So the goodness will be permeated. You will become an agent of peacemaking. There are so many things. This is how we can respond to climatic change. In terms of agriculture, climatic change agriculture need to be promoted. Water management, crop management, soil management need to be need to be given to marginal farmers, small farmers. Freely. We have to do it. It is a national responsibility. We cannot say it will cost a lot and the farmers cannot afford. That is not the way to tell. It is a nation building process. We have to bring this technology down to the farmers so that everybody become climate resilient farmers. With limited water, limited land, they can generate they can build up a sustainable economy, and that will become sustainable in terms of ecology as well. So all these things we need to do. That will be the response to climatic change, and that is how we can solve the problem. Problem solving has two ways. One is curative. It has come. You have to address it. It is a fighting method. The other is preventive method. You dissolve the probable causes so that the problem doesn't occur. And much of the methodology that I talked about is a kind of preventive methodology in conflict management. Yeah.
So you've very well laid out how, in order to solve something really as big as climate change, we first need to focus on ourselves and begin the change with ourselves. So Mahatma Gandhi has also said that non-violence, like charity, begins at home. And even at YCM, we believe that the YCM, we believe in the journey from self to society. So, can you think of a situation in your personal life or professional life where you've had to apply your skills of conflict management and where the absence of such skills would have had detrimental consequences?
Yeah, there are many. There are many occasions. I can tell a few instances from my family, my institution, my friend circle. One instance I would like to narrate. Immediately after my studies, we 4 friends together initiated a social experiment called commune living. It is a joint family of friends with a common kitchen, common economy, common property, everything common. It was an experiment. It went on well. For 7.5 years, we were together. We were about 12 people. With our spouses, we lived together. It was a great experience. We had a lot of thick and thin experiences. By and large, it was one of the most memorable period of my life. One very gray instance in that was one of the friends was he was such a lovely person. He was a great scholar, a poet. He had a lot of positives. He keeps the ambience lively all the time. But he also had certain self-doubt. The land property was common property, and he said the property documents should be with me, so that nothing goes wrong. That was his argument. And the other friend said, why do you ask for it? It is in good hands. If you ask to you, that means you are doubting us. We will not give. And this argument went on for a while, and at one point of time he said, I'm going to police, I am going to divide this property, I don't have any faith in you, that kind of a thing. I mean, people become emotional, egoistic, and it support one another and become a kind of irreconcilable individuals after a period of time. We had great bonding, great energy, great fellowship. Our friendship was very strong, common property, but it turned out to be such a basal feud. And we could have very well gone to the court and divided the property. And he said, no, the paper should be in everyone's hand for 6 months. We basically 4 stakeholders. It should be with one person for 6 months, another person. We said that is not the right way. But finally, I proposed, our friend has no faith in us anymore, no trust in us, and he is ready to go to the court. If he doesn't have faith, let us have faith in him. He is threatening to divide the property, whereas we said, no, let us have complete faith on him. And we said to him, at a point, after a period of struggle, our struggle was to preserve our trustworthiness. He doubted our trustworthiness, and that was hurting. But then finally we told him, not 6 months, forever let this paper be with you. We believe in you. We believe in you. And we gave the whole paper, everything in his hand. And for a period of time he walked out of the commune and he lived elsewhere. And the paper was with him. After a few months he came back and he said, I don't want this paper with me. You keep it. I don't want. I mean, for him, he wanted to test his friends, how far they are trusting one another, and for that reason he raised the problem. He had certain ego. We also had certain ego, and the culmination was when he threatened and he brought the worst pain into the relationship. When we decided to trust him completely, that turned out to be a very positive approach. And in the very next 3 months, he brought the whole paper back and he told, let it be with you. I have no problem. And to this day, we are in great relationship. It is going on. So let us have faith in the goodness of the opponent, and that will solve the problem. Many times we think the other person is not trustworthy. We are not trustworthy to ourselves. I doubt myself. There is a mirror image concept. If I do not trust anybody else, I think others also do not trust us. I measure everyone as I measure myself. So our doubt over our friend was basically our own doubt upon us. So when we have confidence, when we gave everything to him, he also turned out to be a noble soul. So that this way there are many instances that happened in our life, and positive response really strengthened relationship and turned the conflict into a very creative experience. Today we laugh at the instance looking back, both of us sitting together.
So when I asked you to tell me about the situation, you said that you can tell me about your friends or family, and right now also you said that there have been many instances. And even in my life, there have been a lot of conflicts, and I believe that it happens with everyone. Conflicts are unavoidable, right? So what do you think about the statement, dispute resolution skills are life skills?
Yeah. In dispute settlement skill is life skill in the real sense of the term, in the complete sense of the term. because as I said earlier, conflict presumes a relationship. Only between those who are connected there can be a conflict. That means the relationship need to be reset. We have to grow in our relationship from one level to another level, higher level. The relationship need to be strengthened day by day. That is the process, and for that this kind of misperception, misunderstanding, or anything that goes wrong in the relationship need to be reset. So if we are social being, we need to have the art of maintaining relationship, restoring relationship, repairing relationship. If we do not have that, then we cannot be social being at all. So dispute settlement skill is a very essential skill, in which to say conflict, if you see the growth of a conflict, a particular conflict, you can see three distinct levels. Conflictologists put it as potential, latent, and overt level, manifest level. A conflict start with a potential level. It is like a seed. There is no plant visible, but we know the seed has a plant within. Then there is a sprout. The sprout may be within the ground, so still the plant is not visible, but it has started its journey. That is latent. And when it blossoms, it is called a manifest level of conflict. I'll give you an instance. If I go late to my home every day, my wife may not object because I have a lot of other work. I may be engaged in other social action and all. She may not, but it is a potential conflict. I am going late because I am also a member of the family. As a member of the family, I have certain domestic responsibility. If I go late, it means my wife is burdened to that extent more. The household work has to be taken care of her, all the singularly. So it is a potential conflict that I am bringing about. Today there is no fight, there is no murmuring. She doesn't show a stern face, but all these are possible in a day or two, or in a week or two. It is a possibility because I am transgressing the norm of the family, right? That is called potential conflict. Now, as a responsible member of my family, when I go late, I must be conscious that I am late, I am violating, I am taking advantage of the relationship. Anyway, it is a violation. I should know that. That consciousness is a dispute settlement consciousness. It is easy to handle conflict when you identify it at the potential level. A small pain in your stomach, you go to doctor, it is easy to cure. You ignore it for a while and it becomes a huge tumor. It becomes very difficult to handle, right? So potential level, we need to handle it. If I cannot handle it, one day my wife would tell me, see, you are coming late and it is burdening me, or she may shout at me, express her frustration. Then I should know this frustration is not a reaction to my coming late today, but because of my coming late for the last 10 days. It is an accumulated frustration. So I should accordingly respond. At least at this level, I should respond. If I still ignore, I justify, I may have a reason to go late, but that will not justify my responsibility as a member of the family. So if I do ignore at the latent level is now she is showing a stern face. She is not talking to me as freely as earlier. That is the sign. That is a latent. There is a conflict going on in her mind. There is a frustration mounting in her. That is evident in her indifferent contact very perfunctory contact. There is no cordiality. So that is the latent level. We need to recognize it. It is still within our ability to handle it. If I do not handle it, one day she would burst out to the level of breaking the relationship. I am putting it figuratively. It doesn't happen that extent extremely, but when she bursts out, it becomes a manifest conflict, very difficult to handle. You cannot go back to 1 month to justify every delay. You understand? So it is easy to handle conflict at the potential level. This skill is to be imparted to every individual, because we are social being. We have to be in the family, we have to be in the institution, school, colleges, or working place, market. We need to.
So, you told me that there are 3 levels to a conflict, and you made a beautiful comparison of a conflict with a stomach ache and a tumor. And as a society, we have a tendency to resolve conflicts after they've already arisen. But what is your opinion on conflict prevention? Are dispute prevention skills also life skills?
Yeah. Very much. I mean, I'll give you an illustration from the freedom struggle. Britishers ruled over India. They enslaved us. And we need freedom. We have to fight against the Britishers. That is one way. And we took parliamentary process, social struggle process. There are many methodology we adopted. And there was great satyagraha going on. Negotiation, parley, then resistance, all those stuff been going on. But that was not all about. Our slavery was partially our own making. It was not the misdeed of the Britisher alone. They encroached us, they kind of invaded us. That was not the only reason. We were partly cooperating with them through our certain weaknesses. One of the weaknesses was we relied on them for economic requirements. Our cloth were manufactured by the Manchester industries, Lancashire industries. Our instruments, tools and instruments, engineering tools, everything was coming from Britain. If we rely on somebody else eternally, because I cannot produce it, then the producer gets an advantage. The producer becomes superior. And economy is power. Power can be easily converted into, economic power can be easily converted into political power. So political power is sustained essentially by economic power. So Gandhi said the best way to liberate ourselves is to become self-reliant in our economy. And he reintroduced Khadi. Khadi means hand-spun, hand-woven cloth, which was there in India for generations. In fact, we were one of the best textile producers. Our muslin cloth was one of the most desired cloth across the world. So we had the technology, but somehow we lost it. In the first decade of 20th century, Indian community lost touch with textile manufacturing. It became an art of large industries, and much of Indian requirement came from the Britain. And Gandhi reintroduced Khadi, and he made it a freedom struggle campaign. Let us produce our cloth. At one point of time, Lancashire, Manchester were closed down. In Lancashire alone, 500,000 mill workers lost their job because we produced our own cloth. We stopped relying on them. Now, there was no gun, there was no knife to fight against the slavery, but we liberated ourselves. they lost their power, economic power. They cannot say, you have to buy our cloth, you cannot buy, you cannot produce your cloth. They cannot say. So self-reliance is a best way to solve our problems, dispute settlement. This is called constructive dissolution. Constructively, you dissolve the conflict. In a family, if there are two children who are fighting with each other often, you cannot counsel them all the time. You have to find out the reason. The basic reason maybe they are sharing the same room, or they are sharing the same table for reading. So you divide the space. You can have a partition, small partition, and you use this side and the other person will use that side. They are comfortable. And this is very constructive. You did not counsel, you did not admonish, you did not give them punishment. You just created a situation in which conflict ceased to exist. Constructive dissolution. That is part of Satyagraha methodology. Yes.
So you've mentioned familial conflicts, and I think due to the rise of COVID-19 in recent times, there's been an increase in intra-generation as well as intergenerational conflicts. They've reached an all-time high, in fact. So do you have tips for any people who have not had conflict management training on how to prevent and resolve these conflicts?
I mean, it is a new truth. We need to reconcile to the new truth. There is so much of anxiety prevailing because of insecurity, uncertainty. It may be economic uncertainty. Small businessmen lost their job, business, or even salaried people have lost part of their salary. It is delayed. There are a lot of reasons, but that is not occurring to only one individual or a group of people. It is happening across the nation. It is a new truth. I mean, at the higher level, at the national level, we may review the situation and take a policy recourse. That is a different thing. But for individuals, it is the new truth. We need to reconcile to it and say that I am okay. I am okay. That there is a loss, but that is normal, agreeable. It is happening to everyone. That is one. Second, because of our confinement to home, there is an increasing sense of one, boredom. Second, close proximity, prolonged close proximity. Prolonged close proximity. We are staying together as family members for a long period of time, and that creates heat, that creates friction. Individuals, however affectionate to one another, cannot have this closeness for a long period of time. Life is at its best. Life relationship is at its best only when we are at an optimum distance. We have to be close enough to maintain the relationship and far enough to maintain individuality. We have to maintain individuality while maintaining the relationships. For that, we need to have that optimum distance. We may have to re-engage ourselves in lighter activity. Maybe we should have indoor games or some kind of creative expressions. We have to engage ourselves. If you don't engage, boredom will be the worst nemesis. And it will create all kind of enemies in one another where there is actually none. So we have to re-engage ourselves in very constructive expressions, artistic, creative, productive, entertaining, whatever it may be. But we have to, kitchen garden can be one activity, or rooftop garden can be one activity. We need to engage ourselves, or work from home. We have to reorient ourselves to new ways of occupations. And these are all very essential ways. That is something that we need to. And then at least some of us should be matured enough to counsel our other members. If people get frustrated, we cannot argue. I am also equally frustrated. I am also stuck up. Why are you shouting at me? That cannot be the response. We have to be matured enough to understand others' frustration and let them ventilate. Many a time, that is one essential aspect of counseling or dealing with conflict. When a person shout at you because the person is frustrated, the person is not actually shouting at you. The person is shouting at his or her own frustration. The person doesn't know how to ventilate one's frustration, and the person is conveniently using you as the ventilator. I mean, a person requires somebody to shout at, no? And conveniently, the person has taken you as the ventilator. So you must be happy that the person is ventilating oneself. There is an accumulated heat within. The person is ventilating so that after a period of time, the person will be normal. And you have become an instrument of turning the person to normalcy. So listen to the shouting of the other person who is frustrated in such situation. Not all situations. When a person is bedridden, the bedridden life is a frustration because the person want to walk around, eat everything like normal people, but cannot. So there is a impediment. The person is crippled, confined. That is a frustration by itself. And such frustration, they ventilate. They vent upon anyone, even upon the people who help, who serve. We need to understand they are not shouting at us. They are shouting. They are just venting their own frustration. Listen. So listening to the frustration of people itself is a healing touch. So that also has to be added to such situation at the local level, at the domestic level. There are multiple approaches. These are few approaches.
Thank you for this enlightening interview. I think I've learned a lot today. And thank you for being here.
Okay, it's a pleasure talking to you. You brought out very pointed questions that evoked in me a response I thought would be suitable. Might be sometimes I was too elaborate, too long. If I was too long, bear with me. Sorry. I think I made sense. Thank you very much. All the best.